Hey everyone, and welcome back. Now, today I'm bringing you 3 more Craigslist horror stories. And with that said, whether you're sitting around a campfire, on the night shift, or even laying in bed, let my voice soothe your nightmares. If you're gonna judge me for meeting a stranger on Craigslist, I'd prefer that you stop reading right now. I live with enough internal judgment as is. I was 20, and I had used a 1999 blue-green Toyota Corolla, social anxiety, and had $19.13 in my bank account. It was the first semester of my junior year at Carleton College, and there were a half a dozen get-togethers every weekend that I was running out of excuses to avoid. So, I decided that babysitting would be the perfect way to spend my Friday nights. The thought of spending my weekend nights all alone, studying, while making $9 an hour soothed my neurons more than I could possibly say. Don't judge me. You don't know my life. So, when I found Amy on Craigslist, everything seemed perfect. Chloe was 5. Ivan was in his terrible 2s. After a week of email and text exchanges, I felt like I really knew her. She was 33 years old and a stay-at-home mom who was itching to get back into the workforce. "You're perfect," she had disclosed several times via text. Nothing seemed sketchy, and if you can't make a leap of faith at least once in a while, doesn't that make for a miserable and empty existence? I was the consummate professional. I had a pantsuit and everything. Yes, I was wearing Converse to a job interview, but it was kid-friendly, and I was ready to charm the hell out of those kids. I pulled the Corolla in front of the house at 7:30 p.m. for the 8 o'clock interview. Then sat and stared at the windshield for about 20 minutes before walking in 10 minutes early. Because, anxiety. It was already dark by that time in the Minnesota October, and I slipped my way up the frozen cement walkway in an oversized parka and mittens. I rang the doorbell with my thumb and waited. As I watched my breath rise up in plumes, I imagined all the bad things that might be happening behind that door. I couldn't help it. I was relieved when it finally opened, and extremely tense when it wasn't Amy. Unless Amy was a baby-faced man-child with a creepy smile. He stared at me, pale-faced, for several awkward seconds. Then his eyes started to gravitate past my neck and toward my chest. I stated awkwardly. His eyes snapped back up to mine, and he offered a delighted smile. "Come on in." Amy, she's my aunt, and she's in the back with Chloe and Ivan." I watched the steam rise in front of me as I breathed a sigh of relief. He knew everyone's name. That meant he could be trusted, right? I walked into the house, past the staircase, and he snapped the door shut behind me. It was a pretty nice place, to be honest. He walked past me, deeper inside, without offering to take my coat. I waited for a beat, then took it off, looked around, and left it on the floor. I really didn't want to inconvenience anyone by asking where I should put it. I kept the mittens on, but my pantsuit had no pockets. Trotting quickly, I followed him into the kitchen. We went through and came out into a living room, where he then sat down on the couch. He patted the cushions next to him, as I froze in place at the thought of sitting next to a stranger. After an uncomfortable silence, I finally addressed the stranger, which I hate doing. "So, will I be meeting the kids tonight?" I paused. "Because I thought I'd be meeting them." I was an eloquent speaker. "Amy wants you to interview with me," he said in a voice that tried to be smooth, but was just creaky. He then licked his lips. "I have to pee," I announced trippily. "Which way's the bathroom?" The man-child looked genuinely confused. It's the room with the toilet in it." This raised an alarm. One of the very uncomfortable things about social anxiety is knowing that there is sometimes legitimate anxiety that needs to be separated from the things that my friends see to placate me. Do you know that feeling you get when you're about to encounter an ex who you're totally over, but not really? For the first time in months, knowing that he'll be showing up with another woman. Combine that with looking over the edge of a 3-story roof while watching a kid faceplant on the concrete and knocking out his front teeth. That's the level of anxiety that consumes me when I can't control it. I couldn't control it in that moment. I tried to think of something to say, but just gave up and walked out of the living room. The bathroom is the sanctuary of the anxiety-stricken, so I darted my face all around the house in search of one. My eyes landed on the hallway lined with photos, so I headed in that direction with the hopes that it would lead me out of sight. I was walking through the hallway, and suddenly I stopped. The photos on the wall were all of the same family. They didn't look like the man-child at all. A couple who looked to be in their 60s was featured in every one. They were probably 20 years past childbearing age, with flecks of white in their hair. Both were thin and black, which stood in stark contrast to the round-faced, pale man-child in the living room. 3 children appeared in various photos with them, all of whom were in their late teens. I thought about the living room. There were no toys. Chloe is 5. I looked at the blank white fridge. There were no drawings stuck to its surface. And Ivan is 2. There was no baby gate at the staircase, and that's when my anxiety went into overdrive. I would have to go past the living room to exit through the front door. So instead, I turned and trotted down the hall. I thought that I heard man-child stand up, but I wasn't interested in sticking around long enough to find out how much of it was my own imagination. I emerged into a small room with tall vases on the floor. That's kid-friendly, and realized I was at the end of the house. There was no back door though. I tried to open the window, but it was locked. I fumbled with a hitch. I couldn't use my fingers with the mittens binding them, and was unable to open it. My panicked mind told me I don't have time to take off the mittens while I definitely heard a man-child walking through the house, and I finally grasped the hitch and slowly spun around until the window was unlocked. I then pushed and pushed and pushed until it finally opened in a whoosh of cold air. I climbed into the frosty night, but my Converse caught something on the way out. I don't know if it was the sill, or if it was a hand. I tumbled on the ground, and lay still for half a second, and then scrambled to my feet. This was the backyard. I was still far away from my car, though. I ran around the side of the house, trying to stay quiet. Instead, I knocked over the trash barrel, and a cat screamed. As I moved forward, the Corolla began to emerge in the distance, and I started running towards it. That was a mistake, though. Man, was that ground icy. Who knew that a tailbone could hurt so much when it hit the floor? I got up and walked briskly, my feet sliding every which way along the frozen concrete. As I approached my car, my hands were rattling from the cold, nerves, and pain. I tried to get my key through the lock, but it wouldn't go in. Tears streaming. I pinched the tip, aimed it in the keyhole, and forced it. I opened the door and threw myself in, started the car and peeled away without waiting for the engine to warm up. 3 blocks away, I was about ready to give myself permission to cry. The sensation of wrongness hit me then, but it took a second to understand why my spatial orientation was off. There wasn't supposed to be a head in the back seat reflecting from the rearview mirror. I screamed and turned the car towards a tree. The crash wasn't bad, but the airbags deployed. Given the speed I'd been going, it didn't hurt any worse than my tailbone did. I pushed open the car, dropped to the ground, and began throwing up. Once my gut was clear, I sprinted into the woods and hid in the shadows. After 5 minutes had passed, I was about ready to admit that I'd imagined the head in the mirror. I stood up and took 1 step forward when the rear driver's side door opened. A shadow stepped out, and slamming the door behind it, and walked away down the road. 2 hours had passed before the fear of hypothermia finally coaxed me from my hiding spot. I had left my parka in the house. I never told the police about the man in my car. Who would have believed me? Facing the inevitable skepticism that was more than I could bear, I said that a cat had ran in front of me, and that I'd steered toward the tree in an attempt to avoid it. My anxiety had forced me to plan 10, yes, 10 contingency stories for the police if they asked too many of the wrong questions. In the end, though, they simply decided that my car was safe to drive, flipped their notebook into a pocket, and left. I drove straight to my dorm room and stayed there until classes resumed on Monday. My borderline anorexia stormed past its threshold, and I actually felt better skipping meals for 3 days. I had told myself that it was better to keep secrets, and that no one would believe me. Or, even if someone did, it wouldn't do any good, so there was no risk worth seeming crazier than I already was. It helped me sleep at night. For 13 days. At the end of October, a woman named Catherine Ann Olson tried to meet Amy from Craigslist for a babysitting gig. Amy wasn't real, but Michael John Anderson was. He murdered Catherine when she arrived. He had been planning it for some time. Michael will spend the rest of his life in jail. It is impossible to forgive myself for keeping my story a secret. The knowledge that I was so close to dying and saving someone else in doing so has set fire to every nerve in my body. I ended up dropping out of school. I was never able to get back in. That night has shattered my life. Paranoia, fear, and guilt are all present as the sound and light. In a way, I'll spend the rest of my life in jail as well. I was desperate. I had recently been let go from my job as a CNA at the same place after 11 years. Not even a thank you. I was a young woman trying to make ends meet, and I thought I'd struck gold when I first read the posting on Craigslist. Caregiver needed for elderly couple, mostly for wife. Duties will include assisting with bathing and dressing. May also include some cooking and cleaning. Experience is preferred along with a kind heart and worker bee-like attitude. good starting pay offered. I did wonder why they didn't ask for any references, but at that point, I couldn't afford to be picky. My other efforts at finding work hadn't panned out at all. Within less than 24 hours after I applied, I received a response back asking me to come out and meet them the next day. I checked my calendar and I was free. The town was basically one main road running straight through the center of town. There were a few homes on each side. A lot of them were multi-level homes, with some having yards that looked neglected and needed sprucing up. I pulled up to the house with the GPS blaring, "You have arrived at your destination." I got out of my car and took a moment to look around a bit more. As I was scanning, my eyes meet those of an elderly man sitting in a chair on his front porch. I smiled and waved, but instead of returning the gesture, he stared back at me with a blank expression. He had that 1,000-yard stare going, and it made me shiver a bit, despite it being quite warm outside. I didn't see anyone else out, and heard no sounds except an occasional bird chirping somewhere unseen. There was an eerie calmness about the whole area. Answering the front door after several knocks was an elderly man. He introduced himself as Douglas. He welcomed me inside and asked me to take a seat in his living room. I sat down in an open chair, with Douglas saying he'd be right back as he walked upstairs. I heard Douglas lose his footing a couple of times as I'd hear a thud on the wooden stairs every few steps. I got up and walked over to the bottom of the stairs. "Hey, are you okay, sir?" By the time I got over, I saw him disappear around the corner upstairs. He never answered me, though. I retook my seat in the living room and looked around the place. The TV had some old game show on that I didn't even recognize. I have to be honest, the whole place looked a bit unkempt and dusty. And then there was the smell. It was something I couldn't quite put my finger on. Kind of musty, like they hadn't opened up the house in a while. I sat and waited for a while. The whole time, I thought I heard talking from upstairs, even with the TV on. I'm guessing Douglas was talking to his wife. I wanted to get this going, though. Lord knows, I needed this job. Finally, after a while longer, Douglas came back down, this time accompanied by his wife. "Hello, my dear. My name is Martha. How do you do?" Her stuttering threw me off a bit. I extended my hand to shake hers, but all she did was give me that familiar stare like the man outside did earlier. She turned to her husband and simply nodded at her. She awkwardly extended her hand and we shook. I swear I could feel something tingling beneath the skin on her palm, and another shiver came over me. The three of us sat and talked for a bit, and I got mostly yes or no answers to my questions. Before I could ask about their lack of wanting any references, I had nature calling me to find the bathroom. Martha directed me to one through the kitchen and down another hallway. Her instructions weren't too helpful, but I eventually found it. The musty smell assaulted my nostrils as soon as I opened the door. I tried to cover my nose and mouth as best as I could. I thought about cracking the window, but decided to get done and get out. When I opened the toilet, I nearly hurled as another wave of stench hit me. What's worse was what's inside. Bugs everywhere. Some looked dead, but most were squirming around in the water and the bowl. Many climbed over each other to get out as they fell out and came right at my feet. I stepped on a few and they crunched like dry leaves under my shoes. I pulled the door open so hard it slammed into the wall as I let go. I then ran out into the hallway, ready to 1. Apologize for slamming the door, and 2. let them know about their obvious bug problem. But I only made it a few feet when I stopped dead in my tracks. At the end of the long hallway was Martha. She was standing there, completely still. The lighting in the hallway wasn't too good, so I could barely see her face, much less anything else. You okay, my dear? We heard you scream. Everything alright? Yeah. You guys have a lot of bugs in here. Maybe cockroaches. I couldn't tell. And I'm really sorry about the door. Don't worry about the door, my dear. It happens all the time. Come in the kitchen and we'll have some tea. I really didn't like tea, but I figured I needed to try and make up some ground with them. I really didn't like tea, but I figured I needed to make up some ground with them after what just happened. Martha went into the kitchen and I soon followed. She reached into the cabinets and was pulling out seemingly everything inside. Can I help you find something? It was then I stopped talking and took a closer look at my surroundings. On top of the cabinets and the refrigerator, even on Martha's clothes, were more bugs. Possibly hundreds of them, all with their little antennae slowly waving around. And many seemed to be looking right at me with large, dark, compound eyes. Martha! I started stepping out of the kitchen, back towards the living room, and towards the front door. Yes, dear? She was still fumbling around when she finally pulled out the tea kettle. Found it. I took a quick peek behind me, and Douglas was nowhere to be seen. I turned back around to see Martha standing so close to me, our noses. I turned around to see Martha standing so close to me, our noses almost touched. I screamed and fell, landing hard on my back. Martha stood over me, and she had handfuls of the creatures crawling all over her clothes and skin. Some fell off onto me, and I tried to fling them off. Where are you going, my dear? Don't you want some tea? As she spoke, a couple of the things fell out of her mouth. I even saw a top tooth come out as well. I sprang to my feet and turned towards the door, and ran smack right into the thick frame of Douglas. I fell back again, but not all the way over this time. I grabbed a chair for support and half kneeled as the two bodies of Douglas and Martha slowly advanced on me. It was at that point that something came over me and I made a split-second decision. One that I would soon come to regret. I got to my feet and sprinted right past the both of them. I went between them as they tried to grab me and ended up falling into each other. I made it to the front door and reached for the handle. It took me a couple of seconds to realize there wasn't any handle there. I tried to find a way, any way to get the door open. Nothing would work. I frantically looked all around for some other way out, but there was no way I was going into the kitchen or hallway again. I only had one choice, going upstairs. I took the steps 2 at a time, almost slipping in the process twice. The upstairs was no better than downstairs. It was dark and musty. The smell, oh God, the smell was putrid. I covered my mouth and nose with one hand while I tried to open every door I came to. None of them opened, but I swear each time I tried, the handle on one I could hear muffled voices behind the door. They sounded like they were crying out for help. Finally, the last door I came to swung open without effort. The room was small and set up with only a single bed and mattress in it along with a nightstand. The bed was currently unoccupied, and the windows. Both windows had bars crudely placed over them. I just caught my breath when I was shoved down hard from behind. "This one's for you." I turned my head to see Douglas standing over me. I swear he had a look of satisfaction on his face. Martha followed behind him. "They always run. So predictable." She looked down at me and then Douglas before turning back to head down the hall. "I'll get your tea ready since you'll be staying with us now." She laughed in a strange way that sounded forced, like it was foreign to her. I turned back to Douglas, who had now crouched down beside me. "Well, let's get you comfortable in the bed. Our brothers and sisters are waiting." He pointed with both index fingers to the empty room. That's when I heard sounds like a million nails scratching at the inside of the walls. Scratching to get out and get to me. He dragged me over to the bed even as I tried to resist. I had lost the will to fight as soon as I had entered this room, though. This had been their plan the whole time, and I walked right into it. God only knows how many others they had trapped in here. Douglas threw me onto the bed hard and we struggled against one another. He held my arms tight and sat on my pelvis to hold me down. "Now, darling, it'll only hurt for a moment." He leaned over me a bit and opened his mouth wide. That's when I heard his jaw pop out of place. I could hear a loud hissing noise from down in his throat. Then I saw them making their way up and out of his mouth. Two thick and hairy long antennae. They moved about wildly as the head of some god-forsaken monster pushed its way up through his throat. As this was happening, I could feel his hold on me lessen up a bit. I searched all around for anything. To my left, sitting on the nightstand, was a lamp, and it wasn't plugged in. So with everything I had, I pushed Douglas off me and onto the floor. At that moment, the head of the thing had started to emerge. I saw two huge and dark compound eyes look at me before I took a lamp and smashed it. I don't know, maybe a dozen times until it stopped squealing and was nothing more than a bloody pulp on the floor. I was angry now, and I wanted my payback. Still holding the lamp, I took off into the hallway and crept down the stairs until I reached the bottom. I heard Martha, still in the kitchen, fumbling around. I made my way towards her, stopping just before the open doorway. Martha was trying to hum some tune, albeit offbeat, and she had her back to me. I ran in, gripping the lamp in both hands. "Here's your goddamn tea!" I smacked her upside the head and she fell down into the cabinets hard. Her whole body started to convulse as I dropped the lamp and ran to the hallway. The one I said I'd never go back down again. I remember now that the bathroom had a window. I opened the bathroom door and saw my chance at escaping this place, and much to my surprise, there wasn't a bug in sight. I forced the window open and pushed the screen. I climbed out and ran through the tall grass and weeds right to my car. That's when I saw them. People standing in front of their homes. Most of them elderly, but some young. But all were standing and looking right at me. Then they had all opened their mouths and started emitting a collective hissing noise. It was so loud and awful that I had to cover my ears as I got into my car. I floored it in reverse with all the people still standing and now pointing at me. As I drove away, I looked and saw the man I had waved at earlier when I arrived in town. He was waving back this time and had the fakest looking half smile I'd ever seen. His waving arm fell off at the shoulder, and he looked down at it. I turned away in disgust and never looked back. When I was sure I was safe and far enough away, I stopped and called the police from a gas station I found. It was a neighboring police department, and they said they'd be looking into it right away. When they questioned me 2 days later back at my apartment, they told me that the whole town had been abandoned. There was no trace of anybody. Homes left empty, some still with the TVs on. I asked about any people trapped in the house I was at. The officer just shook his head silently. It took me a while, but I did find another job at an assisted living facility. This one I applied for in person though, and I'm happy to say, it's a great place. It is a bit of a drive, but it's worth it. No bugs as far as I can tell. I just want to leave you with this warning though. Those things, whatever they were, are still out there somewhere. I don't know what they are, where they came from, but I think I made a mistake by killing what was inside of Douglas. At night, I can hear the sounds of scratching in my walls. It's my turn for payback. So watch out for news of strange disappearances in your area. And if you ever see a posting like the one I did on Craigslist, or anywhere else, take my advice. Avoid them at all costs. I have to go now. The scratching is getting louder. I don't have much time. I'm at a library computer miles away from town. I'm sure they're somehow still watching me. But I felt like I needed to warn all of you. Please, please be careful who you work for. First, some background to help you understand why I took the job. I'm a newly educated videographer. I had big dreams of Hollywood and blockbuster movie success before, but unfortunately, without 20 years experience, a million certifications, and still being young and strong enough to carry around a camera, I'd been looking for work for the last year or so, but it was hard to get anything steady. Mainly, I acted as a freelance videographer, filming weddings and other things. But then, one day, I got my dream job. Or, at least what I thought was my dream job. I've basically had an ad at Craigslist and a few other freelance-related pages running continuously while sending my measly resume everywhere, and hoping to get something back. So, one day, after having been without work for nearly a month, I get a phone call from a blocked number. I know what you're thinking. Stay away from blocked numbers and all that other stuff. But I really needed a job. And sometimes clients called from blocked numbers or even foreign numbers to book me for wedding video proposals and overly sweet and romantic stuff. So of course, I answered it. There was a man on the other end of the static-ridden line, and at the time, I foolishly referred to him as my savior. His name was Mark, and he had seen my ad on Craigslist and explained that he needed someone to handle a camera and broadcasting equipment at a community TV channel. I barely asked any questions before saying yes. Happy, and I'd finally thought I'd have a steady income every week. and a pretty high starting salary at that. Now, that should have been the first major red flag. The amount they were offering was much higher than what I normally charged, but I thought that maybe they were as desperate as me since they wanted me to come the very next day. So anyway, I took the job. I foolishly and boldly drove straight into hell incarnate the very next day. Their studio was located in the middle of a densely forested area just west of my town. I felt strange driving down the small gravel path to their studio, but my overly logical brain somehow guessed they couldn't afford a studio downtown and powered forward. I had after all promised I'd be there, ready to help them out with the broadcast for that day. And damn, the money is hard to turn away when you have rent and student loans coming up right around the corner. The man on the phone had informed me that they would be filming 3 times a week and that I'd be needed for every show. So, I couldn't just up and leave because the path to their studio looked like something out of a horror movie. I stayed strong and determined until I saw the ramshackle house in front of me. At first, I thought I'd taken a wrong turn somewhere when I saw it, but it was definitely the correct location. A tall man, in his 30s, was standing outside waiting for me when I reached the dilapidated white building in the middle of nowhere. Now, I myself am a pretty strong and agile 23-year-old male, so I wasn't too worried, and I really needed the cash. So, I exited the car like normal and walked up to the waiting one-man welcoming committee. Sure, I was a tiny bit worried about the whole situation, but the man looked pretty normal. He was dressed neatly in a suit and seemed friendly enough. I kept my keys in the ignition though, just in case, but most of my fears were quelled when he started talking. He introduced himself as Mark, and it was definitely the same man I'd talked to on the phone. Mark told me that there were 3 people all in all, and that I'd be filming 1 2-hour show that day. He even handed me the cash up front and told me that he'd seen some of my videos from weddings and my YouTube channel before, so he trusted that I'd do a good job. Hell, he even apologized for the location and explained that they were just starting out and hoped to upgrade in the future. I sympathized with him. I myself knew how hard it was to start something great without the proper funding. So I smiled and followed the man like a bumbling idiot. Everything started out normal enough. I was shown around the house, which looked a hell of a lot better on the inside than it did outside. There was a fully stocked modern kitchen, a living room, and a professional setup for the studio downstairs in the basement. They had everything down there. It was heaven for a small-time videographer like myself. He showed me around and we did a few test shots to ensure the lighting and sound was perfect. The setup in the basement was a typical news broadcast setup. A large desk in front of a cushy news anchor chair, all in front of a large screen with the letters NDBU, which I guessed was the station's name. All in all, it seemed pretty normal. Now, at this time, it was only Mark and I in the studio, but he promised me the other 2 would be there on time. After a few test runs and a few minor changes made to the studio setting, I was all set to go, and Mark excused himself to get ready for the broadcast. This is when things went horribly wrong. Mark had informed me to start filming and run the broadcasting program before they entered the shot. There was even a little intro they wanted me to play before they entered, as well as a stationary camera and a camera dolly set up for more movable shots that Mark had informed me to move in a specific way during the show. So, I did my thing, waiting for the two to enter before both the intro video and the overview shot were done running through their cycle. When the two men entered, dragging a crying woman behind them, I knew something was very wrong. They were wearing masks to cover their face, and had changed their clothes into doctor scrubs as they pulled the woman into a room. I was frozen for a second, watching the two men in their plague masks drag the poor woman into the shot. A small part of me to rationalize the sight in front of me as some twisted dark humor inspired intro. Maybe something they'd planned to do for the month of October. But as they started strapping the sobbing woman down on the table, I understood something was seriously wrong. That wasn't acting. The poor girl was screaming, sobbing, and she had visible bruises covering every part of her body. At least, the parts I could see, as clothes were still covering her shaking frame at this time. I'd stepped forward on instinct, wanting to help the sobbing woman. But just as I took a step forward, the smaller of the two men, the one that was most likely Mark, produced a knife and walked towards me. As the other busied himself with securing the poor woman's straps on the news table, Mark walked out of the shot and up to me, pointing the large butcher knife straight at me. Now, I'm a pretty strong man, but the way Mark handled the knife made him seem larger and more menacing than me. I'm sure he would have killed me right then and there, if I had tried anything. He leaned in close and whispered, barely audible over the woman's pleas for help, right into my ear. You will film, and you will watch. If not, I'll drag you in front of the camera as well. And trust me, you're safer on this side. The friendly tone of his voice was gone as he rested the knife against my throat. It's been weeks, and I can still feel the sensation of cold steel against my throat. I'm ashamed of what I did next, but I thought I was gonna die. Believe me, if I saw some way out of this screwed up crap alive, I would have left. So I nodded. I nodded through my own blubbering and focusing my eyes on the camera, trying to keep his eyes on the machinery and buttons, anywhere other than on the scene in front of me, or the digital screens I'd been happily preparing for the shot. Mark didn't seem to trust me though, so he stayed by my side for what was the longest, most hellish 2 hours of my life. Knife pressed against my throat as I was forced to film and watch this young girl be picked apart piece by piece. Her anguished screams still echo in my head now. I won't go into detail. I can't. What little is left of my sanity won't allow me to relive it. But the man in front of the camera tortured the woman. He tore at her. He cut into her again and again, always keeping her moments away from death. I couldn't do anything at all. All I could do was watch from where I stood behind the camera. I've never felt so weak and useless ever before. Once they killed her, I was almost grateful. I know it seemed heartless, but she was in so much pain. Once the show was over, I was a wreck myself. My throat had several small cuts from the times I flinched away from the knife, and the times my body moved towards her against my will, and a few bruises from when Mark had to subdue me. The two men, however, in their awful masks, seemed pleased with themselves and the sick show they'd put on. The last thing I remember before I passed out from exhaustion and throwing up on the floor of the sickening torture chamber that doubled as a studio was Mark's cheerful voice. I can't remember the exact words, but I remember him yelling into the now eerily quiet studio something along the lines of, "And that's a wrap. And that's a wrap. Great show, guys." I woke up in my car at a small rest stop right outside my town. At first, I thought it was all a sickening nightmare. But once my hazy mind cleared, I knew it wasn't. The cut to my throat told me that much. My second thought was that I was free. I know, I'm a selfish bastard, but I was just happy to have survived hell on earth. They hadn't killed me or locked me in some sick, twisted torture chamber. But no, it was worse than that. On my windshield, there was a note from Mark. A note that described in detail what he would do to my family and me if I told anyone. Threat upon threat filled the damn A4 page. It was like a horror story in itself. He knew everyone. He knew everything. And if I didn't come back 2 days from then, he would hunt me down. I did the cowardly thing. Instead of driving to the police station, I drove home and packed my bags. I called my parents and my older sister, but I didn't tell them what had happened. But I did tell them to hide, get protection, and that someone had threatened them. And then, I got the hell out of Dodge. I thought I was safe at this time. I couldn't have been any more wrong. I drove throughout the night and stopped at a small motel a few towns over. I brought basically nothing with me other than my laptop, phone, camera equipment, and a few changes of clothes. I paid in cash and barricaded myself in my room. I was stupid enough to think that if I didn't leave a paper trail, they couldn't find me. I even managed to calm down enough to consider calling the cops on that sick bastard. My family was safe. I was far away from that hellhole. They would be caught and everything would be fine. That night, I barely even slept. The nightmares were gruesome. But at some point between Skyping my family to make sure they were safe and drinking enough whiskey to make an arch enemy out of my liver, I somehow went to sleep. I woke up the next morning from the sound of text messages pouring in on my phone. I thought I was safe, but I wasn't. I definitely wasn't. Every single message was the same thing. Pictures. Pictures of me sleeping in my bed. Of my family sitting in a nondescript motel room. And a screenshot showing my exact location on a map. I panicked. I almost tore the room apart looking for them. Maybe that's why it took so damn long to see the green light next to the webcam on my open MacBook, and to realize all the pictures came from that exact position. They hacked my computer. How? I don't know, but I knew why. They wanted me to know that they could find me. So I dumped my computer and my phone after informing my family to do the same, and drove out of town before the sun even reached the horizon. I have been driving for 2 days now. This is my first time stopping, and I'll be leaving town as soon as I post this. I don't know why they chose me. I don't know if they'll go through with their threats if I don't contact the police. All I know is that they will be coming after me. I know you might be wondering why they needed someone to film. Why they needed me at all instead of just setting up the cameras themselves and leaving one on the tripod whilst Mark handled the other. I've had some days to think about that myself, and I think, even though the thought alone makes me sick, they wanted someone to watch. They wanted me to see them mutilate this poor woman. I was just part of what made this sick game they're playing even more fun. I'm just the cherry on top of their goddamn sickening sundae of torture and murder. I have to go now. Not sure if they know where I am, but I'm afraid they might now. I'm afraid to sleep, or even stop moving. I just wanted you to know I didn't want this. If I could have, I would have saved her. If I could do anything at all, I would have. Hey everyone, thanks for watching. I appreciate it a lot. And also, big thanks to my patrons, and if you want to support me, the link to my Patreon is in the description below. And if you want to hear more scary stories in the future, don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment on this video. Thank you.